The rain was pouring when my son drove away from Hayes Motor Lodge with my suitcase, heart medication, phone, and house keys still inside his car. "Maybe this will finally teach you to stop making everything difficult," my daughter-in-law called through the open window. I stood beneath the flickering motel sign, telling myself they would return. But after an hour, the road remained empty, and the debit card in my purse was declined. When I finally entered the lobby, the elderly owner noticed my wedding ring. "What was your husband's name?" he asked. "Richard Wilson." His face went pale. He locked the front door, leaned toward me, and whispered, "Richard told me this day might come." Before I tell you what my late husband had hidden at that roadside motel, please like this video and subscribe if you believe no parent deserves to be abandoned by their own family. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who is sharing these stories with me. 8 months before I stood abandoned beneath the flickering sign of Hayes Motor Lodge, I believed the worst thing that could ever happen to me had already happened. My husband Richard died on a quiet Tuesday morning in our kitchen. There had been no dramatic warning, no long hospital stay, no final conversation in which we said everything people imagined they would say if they knew the end was coming. I had been standing at the counter, pouring coffee into my favorite blue mug, when he suddenly gripped the edge of the sink. "Deb," he said softly. That was all. By the time the ambulance arrived, the man I had loved for 44 years was gone. Richard and I had never lived the kind of marriage people wrote about in anniversary cards. We disagreed about money, argued over thermostat settings, and once spent an entire weekend barely speaking because he had donated my favorite armchair without asking me. But we respected each other. Every morning, Richard made the coffee because he claimed mine could wake the dead and frighten the living. Every night, he checked the doors twice before coming upstairs. Whenever he left before I woke, he placed a note beside my mug. "Don't forget your umbrella. Call the dentist. You looked beautiful yesterday." That last one had remained stuck to the refrigerator for nearly 3 years because I could never bring myself to throw it away. Richard had spent most of his career as the chief accountant for a medical equipment distributor outside Columbus. He understood numbers the way I understood books. I had been a high school librarian for 32 years, and while I could remember the location of almost every novel in the building, tax documents made my eyes glaze over. So Richard handled the finances. I trusted him completely. After his funeral, the house seemed to change shape around me. Rooms that had once felt comfortable became too large. The hallway clock sounded painfully loud. At night, I sometimes woke and reached toward his side of the bed before remembering there was no one there. That was when my son, Jason, began coming around more often. At first, I was grateful. Jason was our only child. He was 43, married to Melissa, and running a small home renovation business. He had always been closer to Richard than to me, though their relationship had become strained during the last few years of Richard's life. Still, after the funeral, Jason seemed determined to take care of me. He brought groceries every Saturday. He replaced a leaking faucet in the guest bathroom. When I had a cardiology appointment, he drove me there and sat beside me in the waiting room. Melissa brought casseroles and containers of soup labeled with heating instructions. "You shouldn't have to worry about anything right now," she told me one evening as she placed a tray of chicken and rice into my freezer. That's what family is for. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. 3 weeks after the funeral, Jason sat with me at the dining table, while unopened envelopes formed a small pile between us. "Dad always handled this stuff," he said. "It's too much for you to manage while you're grieving." "I can learn," I replied. "I know you can." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But you don't have to do it alone." He suggested adding his name to my checking account for emergencies. If I became ill or needed help paying a bill, he said the bank would not cause unnecessary delays. It sounded practical. Richard had always told me that Jason was good with people even when he was careless with details. I remember wishing Richard were there to advise me, but grief had made every decision feel exhausting. So I agreed. The changes came slowly after that. Melissa began opening the mail before handing it to me. It was mixed in with ours, she explained the first time I questioned her. Jason changed the passwords to my online banking and email accounts. Security update, he said. There are so many scams targeting widows. Whenever I asked for the new passwords, he told me not to worry because he had everything under control. Then Melissa began pointing out my mistakes. One afternoon, I could not find my house keys. She discovered them in the pocket of my winter coat and gave Jason a worried look. Another time, I asked her twice what time Hannah's college orientation began. You already asked me that, she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. I know. I just wanted to be certain. But the concern in her eyes made me uncomfortable. Soon, she was mentioning my memory in front of other people. At Sunday dinner, she told Hannah that I had forgotten to pay the electric bill. That was not true. Jason had taken the bill home and forgotten to submit the payment, but when I corrected Melissa, Jason laughed. Mom, it's okay. Everyone forgets things. Everyone at the table smiled sympathetically. I did not. A month later, I visited the bank to withdraw cash for a church fundraiser. The teller printed a balance slip, and I noticed the amount was lower than I expected. I asked for a recent statement. There listed among ordinary purchases and utility payments was a transfer for $12,000. My hands began to shake. The money had been moved into an account I did not recognize. When I called Jason, he was silent for several seconds. Then he sighed. Dad promised me that money. For what my business? He said he wanted to help me get through a difficult period. Richard never mentioned it. He didn't tell you everything, Mom. The words stung more than I expected. Richard and I had kept some things from each other, as most married couples probably do. But $12,000 was not a small secret. Why didn't you ask me first? I said. Because I knew you'd react like this. Like what? Suspicious. Emotional. I stared at the statement in my hand. It was my account, Jason. It was Dad's money too. And now, he's gone. The silence that followed felt like a door closing. When Jason spoke again, his voice had softened. Mom, I'm trying to keep my company alive. I have employees depending on me. Dad understood that. I thought you would too. By the end of the conversation, I was the one apologizing. That evening, Melissa came over with a lemon pie and sat beside me on the couch. Jason feels terrible, she said. He thinks you don't trust him. I only wanted an explanation. Of course. But you've been under so much stress lately. Grief can affect memory and judgment. Her voice was gentle, but something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. A few days later, I found a torn envelope in the kitchen trash. The return address belonged to my bank. I pulled out the pieces and tried to fit them together on the counter. Most of the letter had been shredded, but I could still read a few phrases. Unusual account activity. Authorization review. Contact us immediately. I heard the garage door opening before I could reconstruct the rest. Jason entered through the kitchen carrying 2 bags of groceries. The moment he saw the pieces spread across the counter, he stopped. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. But it was not the smile of the little boy who once ran into my arms after school. It was the careful smile of a man deciding how much truth I could be allowed to know. When Jason suggested we take a short trip to Kentucky, I almost cried with gratitude. You've been trapped inside this house for months, he said one Saturday morning, while helping me water the flowers on the front porch. Aunt Linda keeps asking about you. She'd love to see you. I smiled for what felt like the first genuine time in weeks. Linda was actually my cousin, but we had always called each other sisters. We grew up spending summers together, shared clothes as teenagers, and even stood beside each other at our weddings. After Richard died, she had called every Sunday without fail, begging me to visit whenever I felt ready. "I don't know," I said. "It's a long drive. I'll do all the driving. You're busy. You're more important." Those 4 words wrapped around my grieving heart like a warm blanket. Melissa immediately volunteered to organize everything. "You shouldn't have to worry about packing," she said. "Just enjoy yourself." The morning we were supposed to leave, she arrived carrying a brand new overnight bag. "I packed all your clothes," she announced proudly. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." She walked through my bedroom collecting my medications, phone charger, wallet, toiletries, and insurance card. "Let me keep everything together," she said. "That way, nothing gets lost." I reached for my purse. "I usually carry my driver's license." Melissa smiled. "I already put it in the travel pouch." "My house keys, those too. My heart medication, in the same pouch. My phone, I'll keep it charging in the car." Every answer sounded perfectly reasonable. After all, Melissa had always been far more organized than I was. I didn't realize I was handing over every piece of my independence. Jason loaded my small suitcase into the trunk, while Melissa carefully placed the gray travel pouch on the back seat. "Ready, Mom." I looked back at my house. Richard had planted the maple tree in the front yard the year Jason started kindergarten. The porch swing still creaked the same way it had 20 years earlier. A hummingbird hovered beside my flower basket before disappearing into the morning sunlight. "I'll only be gone a few days," I whispered to myself. If I had known what would happen, I would have stood there a little longer. The drive started pleasantly enough. Jason played old country songs Richard used to enjoy. Melissa pointed out roadside antique shops. For nearly an hour, I almost believed we were simply a family taking a weekend trip together. Then something began bothering me. I had driven to Kentucky with Richard dozens of times over the years. The scenery outside the window didn't look familiar. Instead of heading southeast, we seemed to be traveling farther south before turning west. I leaned forward. "Jason?" "Yeah, aren't we supposed to be on Interstate 75 by now?" Now he kept his eyes on the road. "We're taking a shortcut." "I don't remember this route. GPS found a faster one." I nodded, but uneasiness settled quietly inside me. 20 minutes later, we passed a sign for a town I had never seen before. "Jason?" "What, I really don't think we're going the right way," Melissa answered before he... "We're making one quick stop." "What kind of stop?" Jason hesitated. "There's a retirement community nearby." I laughed because I assumed he was joking. Neither of them laughed back. "What do you mean, nothing serious?" Melissa said lightly. "We just thought we'd look around. Why, you've been alone since Richard passed away. I live perfectly well by myself." Jason tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "No one's saying you don't. Then why would we visit a retirement community?" Melissa folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Just to see your options. I don't need options. You might someday." "I said I don't." Silence filled the car. Outside, the clouds began covering the afternoon sun. Finally, Jason spoke. "Mom, that house is too much for one person. I've lived there for 36 years. You nearly slipped on the front steps last month. I missed one step. You could have broken your hip. I didn't." Melissa turned toward me. "We're only thinking about your safety. My safety." "Yes. I've never told either of you that I wanted to move. You don't always know what's best anymore." The words struck me harder than I expected. "What is that supposed to mean?" Melissa smiled politely. "You've been forgetting things." "I forget little things." "You asked Hannah the same question twice last Sunday. Everyone repeats themselves." Jason cleared his throat. "We're just worried." No, I said quietly. You're making me worried. Neither of them answered. About an hour later, Jason pulled into a large gas station beside the highway. I need fuel. Melissa unbuckled her seatbelt. I'll grab some coffee. I'll come with you, I offered. No, she said quickly. Just relax. They both disappeared inside the convenience store. I stayed in the car for several minutes before deciding to stretch my legs. The cool air felt wonderful after sitting for so long. As I slowly walked toward the building, I heard Melissa's voice around the corner near the ice machines. She was talking on her cell phone. At first, I paid little attention. Then I heard my name. Yes, she'll be out tonight. I stopped walking. No, she won't be going back. A pause. The photographer can come tomorrow morning. Another pause. Yes. Change the locks before the weekend. Every muscle in my body froze. My heart began pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rest. The paperwork is almost ready. Melissa continued. Once she's settled, the house won't be a problem anymore. I stepped backward before she could see me. My knees felt weak. Surely I had misunderstood. There had to be another explanation. Jason appeared carrying 2 coffees. Mom, I turned toward him. Who is changing the locks? His smile disappeared. What I heard, Melissa. She said someone should change the locks. Melissa rounded the corner, instantly noticing my expression. What happened? I heard your conversation. What conversation? The one about changing locks. Melissa blinked. Oh! She laughed. Oh my goodness, Deborah. My name is Mom. She gave another little laugh. I was talking about one of my old real estate clients. You said I'd be out tonight. You misheard. No, I didn't. Jason sighed heavily. Mom, I heard every word. You're under a lot of stress. I know exactly what I heard. Melissa stepped closer. Deborah, grief affects people differently. I am not imagining things. No one said you were. But that's exactly what you're implying. Jason rubbed his forehead. We're trying to help you. Then tell me the truth. There isn't anything to tell. Why are we visiting a retirement community just looking? Why are you talking about changing locks? It wasn't about you. Then why did you say I'd be out tonight? Melissa crossed her arms. You're connecting things that aren't connected. The calmness in her voice frightened me more than anger would have. She sounded practiced, prepared, as though she had expected this conversation long before it happened. I looked at Jason. Do you believe I'm losing my mind? His eyes dropped toward the pavement. He hesitated. I think you've been having a difficult time since Dad died. That wasn't my question. Another silence. Finally, he answered. I think it might help if you spoke with someone. A counselor. A doctor? What kind of doctor? He didn't answer immediately. One who evaluates memory. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. You think I have dementia? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Tears burned my eyes. Richard had trusted Jason with everything. We both had. How long have you been talking about this? Melissa spoke gently. We've only been discussing what's best for you. I decide what's best for me. You may not always be able to. For the first time in my life, I looked at my own son and wondered whether he saw me as his mother anymore, or merely as an obstacle standing between him and something he desperately wanted. Neither of us spoke for the next 40 minutes. Rain began falling as daylight slowly faded into evening. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with quiet determination. Eventually, Jason exited the highway onto a narrow country road. A faded neon sign appeared through the rain. Hayes Motor Lodge. Several of the letters flickered on and off. Jason parked near the office. I think something's wrong with the car, he said. Melissa opened her door. We'll only be here a few minutes. I looked through the rain at the lonely roadside motel. For reasons I couldn't explain, a cold feeling settled deep inside my chest. I had the strange, overwhelming sense that once I stepped out of that car, my life would never be the same again. The rain had grown heavier by the time Jason shifted the car into park. The old motel looked like it had been forgotten by the rest of the world. Half of the neon letters buzzed weakly above the office. The parking lot was almost empty except for an aging pickup truck, a faded blue sedan, and our SUV. Water streamed down the cracked pavement, collecting in shallow puddles that reflected the blinking sign. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. "Are we spending the night here?" I asked. "No," Jason answered quickly. "The car is making a strange noise. I just want someone to look at it." Melissa turned in her seat and smiled. "It'll only take a few minutes." I looked around. "This doesn't look like a repair shop." "It's the only place nearby," Jason replied. "The owner knows a mechanic." I wasn't convinced, but I didn't argue. Jason climbed out first. Melissa opened the rear door and reached for the gray travel pouch that contained everything important to me. "My medication," I reminded her. "I've got it. My phone. It's charging. My wallet. In the pouch. I'll just carry it myself." She shook her head. "You don't need to. You'll only be inside for a minute." She closed the rear door before I could respond. Then Jason walked around to my side and opened my door. "Come on, Mom." As I stepped onto the wet pavement, I instinctively reached toward the back seat. "My suitcase." Jason gently closed the door before I could touch it. "We'll leave it here. What if we end up staying longer?" "We won't." Melissa locked the vehicle with a cheerful beep. Everything happened so naturally that I almost ignored the uncomfortable feeling growing in my stomach. Almost. The three of us walked toward the motel office. Rain drummed against the metal awning overhead. Inside, a warm yellow light spilled through lace curtains. The office looked surprisingly welcoming. An old grandfather clock stood beside a bookshelf filled with paperbacks. A coffee pot rested on a wooden counter. Someone had placed fresh flowers in a glass vase. It reminded me more of a country home than a roadside motel. Jason stopped just outside the inn. "You wait here for a minute." "I thought we were all going inside." "I just need to ask about the mechanic." "I'll come." "No need." Melissa touched my arm. "Stay dry." "I don't mind getting wet." Jason smiled. "I'll be right back." He disappeared through the office door. Melissa remained beside me. Neither of us spoke. A minute passed, then another. Finally, Jason returned. "The mechanic is out on another call." "So what now?" "He'll be back soon." "How soon?" Jason shrugged. "Hard to say." Melissa glanced toward the SUV. "I think I'll grab us some bottled water." "I'll come with you." "No, stay here with Jason." She hurried across the parking lot. Jason kept checking his phone, or at least pretending to. Something wasn't right. The silence between us felt forced. I studied my son's face. He looked exhausted. There were deep lines beneath his eyes that hadn't been there a year earlier. For a brief moment, I saw the little boy who used to crawl into our bed after thunderstorms. "Jason?" "Yeah. Are you all right?" He looked surprised. "Of course." "You seem nervous." "I'm just worried about the car." "You've hardly looked at the car." His eyes drifted away from mine. Before I could say anything else, Melissa returned. "We're almost out of gas," she announced. Jason frowned. "I thought we filled up." "I guess we didn't get as much as I thought. There was a station 15 minutes back." "I know." She looked at me. "Why don't you wait here while we go fill the tank?" I stared at her. You're leaving me here. It'll only take 10 minutes. I can come. Jason answered immediately. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. He forced a smile. The mechanic could arrive while we're gone. I'll wait in the car. Melissa shook her head. You'd be more comfortable inside. I don't mind waiting. Jason put a hand on my shoulder. We'll be right back. His voice sounded almost pleading. Something inside me screamed not to let them go. I'd rather stay with you. He avoided my eyes. We won't be long. Melissa climbed into the passenger seat. Jason walked around to the driver's side. Then just before getting in, she rolled down her window. She looked directly at me. There was no warmth in her expression anymore. No sympathy. No concern. Only cold impatience. Maybe this will finally teach you to stop making everything difficult. For a second, I wasn't sure I had heard correctly. What? But Jason had already started the engine. The headlights came on. The SUV backed out of its parking space. I expected it to stop. I expected Jason to roll down his window and laugh. Mom, we were only teasing. Instead, the vehicle turned toward the highway. I took one step forward, then another. Rain soaked my hair within seconds. Jason! My voice disappeared beneath the sound of the storm. The taillights grew smaller. I began walking faster. Then I was running. At 68 years old, with aching knees and a heart that had never fully recovered after Richard's death, I ran through the rain after my own son's car. Jason? The SUV reached the highway, turned, and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there breathing hard. Surely they had forgotten something. Maybe they were turning around. Maybe they were finding another gas station. Maybe. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No headlights returned. The rain became colder. My cardigan clung heavily to my shoulders. I searched my pockets. No phone, no medication, no wallet, only $12 in cash and a packet of tissues. My heart began pounding, not from running, from fear. I walked back toward the office with trembling legs. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside. The warmth almost made me cry. Behind the front desk stood an elderly man with silver hair and gentle eyes. He looked up from an old ledger. Evening. My voice cracked. I'm sorry. He immediately came around the counter. Are you all right, ma'am? I think... The words caught in my throat. I think my family left me. He didn't ask whether I had been drinking. He didn't look annoyed. He simply pulled out a chair. Please. I sat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. He quietly placed a mug of hot tea in front of me. What happened? My son said they'd be back. How long ago? Maybe. I looked at the clock. Almost an hour. His expression changed slightly. Did they leave you with a phone? No. Medication? No. Identification? I slowly shook my head. My daughter-in-law packed everything into a travel bag. And they drove away with it. Yes. I was silent for several seconds. Then he asked gently, What is your name? Deborah. My full name is Deborah Wilson. He nodded thoughtfully. And your husband's name? The question surprised me. My husband? Yes. He passed away 8 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss. So am I. What was his name? I swallowed. Richard. Richard Wilson. The old man's face lost all color. He stared at me so intensely that I wondered if I had said something wrong. His eyes drifted slowly toward my left hand. toward the wedding ring I still wore every single day. He stepped closer. May I? Confused, I held out my hand. He gently turned the ring until the inside faced the light. The tiny engraving became visible. R&D, always home. The man closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with something I couldn't understand. Recognition, disbelief, perhaps even sorrow. Without saying another word, he walked to the entrance. He locked the front door. Then he turned the sign from vacancy to closed. He pulled the curtains shut. My heartbeat quickened. What are you doing? Instead of answering, he returned to the counter. He leaned toward me and lowered his voice until it was barely more than a whisper. Mrs. Wilson. Yes. Did your son know he brought you here? I think so. The old man looked toward the rain-covered parking lot before meeting my eyes again. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. Richard Wilson told me this day might come. Every thought inside my head stopped. I stared at him. My mouth opened, but no words came out. After nearly 44 years of marriage, I had believed there were no more secrets left between Richard and me. I was about to discover just how wrong I had been. For several long seconds, I simply stared at the elderly man. I was certain I had misunderstood him. Perhaps grief had finally caught up with me. Perhaps exhaustion, fear, and the cold rain had blurred my thoughts. My husband, I whispered. What did you say? The old man looked toward the rain-soaked windows before answering. I said Richard Wilson told me this day might come. A chill spread through my body that had nothing to do with the weather. That's impossible. I wish it were. You knew my husband. He nodded slowly. For many years. I searched his face desperately. Richard had always been an open man with me, or so I had believed. He never disappeared for mysterious weekends. He never hid money. He never received secret phone calls. If this man truly knew Richard, why had I never heard his name? I don't understand. I know. He spoke with remarkable calmness, as though he had rehearsed this conversation countless times in his own mind. My name is Walter Hayes. I repeated it quietly. Walter Hayes. The name meant nothing to me. I'm the owner of Hayes Motor Lodge. I've never been here before. No. You've never met me before. No. So why? Walter raised one hand gently. Please. There are a few things I need to ask before I explain anything. His voice wasn't suspicious. It was careful, almost protective. Did your son take your identification? Yes. Your medication? Yes. Your phone? Yes. House keys? Yes. Bank cards? My debit card is still in my purse. I opened it. The card was there. I felt a tiny wave of relief until I remembered trying to pay for a room. It was declined. Walter nodded. I thought it might be. You knew. I suspected. I looked at him in confusion. How? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked behind the counter and returned carrying a small first aid box. From inside, he removed a blood pressure monitor. May I check your blood pressure? You've had a terrible shock. I nodded. He wrapped the cuff around my arm with practiced hands. You've done this before. My wife had heart disease. His voice softened. For nearly 12 years. The machine beeped. Walter frowned slightly. Your pressure is higher than I'd like. I need my medication. I know. He walked into a room behind the office. A minute later, he returned carrying a small white bottle. I looked at it in disbelief. It was the exact medication Richard had insisted I never miss. Same dosage, same manufacturer, same prescription strength. My eyes widened. How? Walter placed 2 tablets beside a glass of water. Take one. I can't. He looked surprised. I don't take medication that belongs to someone else. A faint smile appeared on his face. It isn't someone else's. What do you mean? Richard left it here. I froze. My husband. Yes. That's impossible. He replaced it every 6 months. I couldn't breathe. Richard had been dead for 8 months. You're saying he prepared for the possibility that one day you would arrive here without your medicine. I stared at the bottle. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The label wasn't someone else's. It simply read, "Emergency supply, no patient name, no pharmacy label." Just Richard's neat handwriting. I suddenly remembered something. About 3 years earlier, Richard had begun requesting extra medication from our doctor before road trips. When I asked why, he smiled. You never know when life throws surprises at you. I thought he was simply being practical. Now, nothing made sense anymore. Walter waited patiently while I swallowed the pill. The warmth of the tea slowly eased the tightness in my chest. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I don't mean to keep saying this, but I know. I don't understand. You will. When I know you're safe. His answer only deepened the mystery. Safe from who? He looked directly into my eyes. Your family. The word hit me harder than I expected. My family. Richard believed there might come a day when they would try to control your life. No, he hoped he was wrong. He loved Jason. I know. He would never, Walter interrupted gently. He loved Jason. Past tense, not love, loved. As fathers do. The silence between us became almost painful. Finally, I whispered, What exactly did Richard tell you? Walter folded his hands together. He didn't tell me everything. Then what did he tell you? He said that if you ever appeared here alone, Walter paused. Without identification, another pause. Without your medication, without your phone. If anyone claimed you were confused, unstable, or incapable of making your own decisions, I was to protect you. I felt my heart begin racing again. Why? He believed someone might try to convince the world that you were no longer capable of deciding for yourself. I remembered Melissa's comments. You asked that twice. You're forgetting things. You don't always know what's best anymore. The words suddenly sounded different, not concerned, prepared, planned. I thought, my voice cracked. I thought they were worried about me. Walter looked at me with heartbreaking compassion. Mrs. Wilson, I've spent months wondering if I was losing my memory. His eyes lowered. I know. No. Tears filled my eyes. You don't understand. I started writing notes to myself. I laughed bitterly. I labeled kitchen cabinets. I checked the stove 3 times before bed. I kept wondering why I couldn't remember conversations. Walter remained silent. I even asked my doctor whether early dementia runs in families. The tears finally spilled over. What if? I whispered. What if they made me believe something that wasn't true? Walter handed me a clean handkerchief. That happens more often than people realize. I buried my face in my hands. Richard. How long had he known? How much had he seen that I hadn't? When I finally looked up again, Walter was watching the front window. The rain continued falling steadily outside. Headlights occasionally passed along the highway. None turned into the motel. I should call Jason. Walter slowly shook his head. Not yet. He may be looking for me. I believe he already knows exactly where you are. I frowned. What do you mean? He chose this motel. Yes. Richard never believed that would be an accident. A cold feeling settled inside me. You think Jason brought me here on purpose? Walter didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked to an old wooden cabinet beside the office desk. He unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was an inexpensive prepaid cell phone, still sealed in its original plastic bag. He carried it back carefully. Richard left this too. I stared at it. When? About 18 months ago. 18 months? Yes. He renewed the battery every few months. My hands shook again. He really believed this day would happen. Walter nodded sadly. He prayed it never would. I looked toward the front door. The parking lot remained empty. No Jason, no Melissa, no lights returning through the rain. The truth settled into my heart with unbearable weight. They weren't coming back. Walter opened the phone package. There is only one contact saved. Who is it? A woman named Catherine Brooks. The name meant nothing to me. Who is she? Walter met my eyes. The only person Richard trusted almost as much as he trusted himself. Before I could ask another question, the office telephone suddenly rang. The sharp sound echoed through the empty lobby. Walter looked at the caller ID. His expression changed instantly. He didn't answer. The phone continued ringing. Again, again, again. Finally it stopped. A second later it rang once more. Walter exhaled slowly. I think that's your son. How do you know? He usually calls 3 times when he's anxious. You've spoken to Jason before. No. Then, I've simply known people like him. The ringing finally stopped. Walter looked at the prepaid phone in his hand, then back at me. It's time. For what? He gently placed the phone on the counter between us. For you to speak with the one Richard trusted to finish what he could no longer protect himself. I reached toward the phone with trembling fingers, completely unaware that the conversation waiting on the other end would reveal the first secret my husband had carried alone for years. I stared at the prepaid phone for nearly a full minute before picking it up. My fingers felt stiff as though they belonged to someone else. Walter didn't rush me. He simply stood nearby with his hands folded, giving me the quiet patience of someone who understood that a single phone call could change a life. What if she doesn't answer? I asked. Walter smiled faintly. She will. How can you be so sure? Because Richard made sure she would. I looked at the single name saved in the contacts. Catherine Brooks, nothing more. No office number, no address, just a name. I pressed the call button. The phone rang only once. Deborah? The woman on the other end spoke my name before I said a single word. I froze. Hello? Deborah Wilson. Yes. My name is Catherine Brooks. Her voice was calm, confident, and strangely familiar, although I was certain we had never met. If you're calling me from Walter's phone, I need you to answer one question. I swallowed. All right. What did Richard call you every Christmas morning before opening presents? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Only Richard knew the answer. Every Christmas morning, before either of us touched the gifts beneath the tree, he would kiss my forehead and whisper the same words. My favorite chapter. There was silence. Then Catherine exhaled softly. It's really you. How did you know that? Because Richard told me that if anyone ever claimed to be you, they wouldn't know the answer. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Even now, even after his death, Richard was still protecting me. I don't understand, I whispered. I know. I've been saying that all night. And by tomorrow morning, you'll understand more than you ever wanted to. Her words sent another wave of fear through me. Catherine, before we continue, I need Walter to confirm that you're alone. I handed him the phone. He answered only briefly. She's here. A pause. No. Another pause. They haven't returned. Walter listened quietly before saying, I'll do exactly as Richard asked. He handed the phone back. Deborah, Catherine continued, I need you to stay where you are tonight. I want to go home. I know. But you can't. Why? Because your home may no longer be safe. My heart skipped. What do you mean? When Jason left you at the motel, do you know where he probably went? I shook my head before realizing she couldn't see me. No. Back to your house. I felt physically sick. No. I'm afraid so. He wouldn't. He already has. My knees weakened. I lowered myself into the chair again. How can you know that? Because Richard predicted exactly how this would happen. I closed my eyes. Every answer created 10 new questions. Deborah. Yes. I need to ask you something very important. All right. Did Jason convince you to add his name to your bank account? Yes. Did Melissa begin handling your mail? Yes. Did they gradually start telling people you were becoming forgetful? Yes. Did they suggest moving you into a retirement community? Today. Catherine became quiet. I was hoping Richard had been wrong. So was I. What is happening to my family? She answered carefully. I believe you've been experiencing financial abuse and psychological manipulation. The words sounded almost unreal. I don't understand. Has Jason ever made you question your own memory? Almost every week. Has Melissa corrected you in front of other people? Yes. Have you started doubting yourself because of it? I looked down at my shaking hands. I thought maybe I really was changing. That was the point. The sentence hit me harder than anything else that night. The point. People become easier to control when they stop trusting themselves. I remembered every tiny incident, the missing keys, the repeated questions, the forgotten passwords, the comments at family dinners, the sympathetic smiles. Every moment I had apologized for being forgetful. Every moment I had wondered whether Richard would be disappointed to see me becoming confused. What if? I whispered. What if I wasn't forgetting more than normal? Catherine's answer came immediately. Then they succeeded in making you believe something that wasn't true. A sob escaped before I could stop it. For months, I had blamed myself. Richard had once told me that memory naturally changes with age, but he had never treated me like I was incapable. Never. Not once. Deborah, I'm here. I need you to listen carefully. I'm trying. Richard hired me almost 2 years ago. My eyes opened. 2 years. Yes. He came to my office because he was worried. Worried about what? You. Why didn't he tell me? He believed you would protect Jason. I wanted to argue. Instead, I remained silent because deep inside I knew Richard had probably been right. If he had come home and accused our son of stealing, would I have believed him, or would I have defended Jason? I honestly didn't know. What exactly did Richard tell you? I asked. He said Jason had begun asking unusual questions. What kind? Questions about durable powers of attorney. My stomach tightened. He also asked whether a person with mild memory problems could be declared legally incapable. I covered my mouth. No. He wanted to understand emergency guardianship. I could barely hear my own breathing. Richard didn't accuse him immediately. What did he do? He watched. And he found evidence. What evidence? Catherine took a slow breath. He discovered several checks missing from your checkbook. I closed my eyes. He compared your signature. Another pause. They weren't written by you. My chest tightened painfully. Richard confronted Jason. What happened? Jason claimed he had borrowed the money. Did Richard believe him? For a little while. I wasn't surprised. Richard always wanted to believe the best in people, especially our son. But then, Catherine continued, Richard noticed something else. What? Jason began contacting your doctors. My blood ran cold. He asked questions about your medical history. I remembered Jason attending appointments with me after Richard died. At the time, I thought it was kindness. Now, everything looked different. He wasn't gathering information to help you. He was building a file. A file, one that could eventually support a guardianship petition. I couldn't speak. Richard had known. Long before his heart attack. Long before I noticed anything. What did Richard do? He moved quickly. How? He transferred your house. I blinked. My house? Into a living trust. I never signed anything. Yes, you did. When? The estate planning meeting 3 years ago. Memories slowly returned. Richard had insisted we update our wills after one of our neighbors passed away. I remembered signing several documents. I hadn't read every page. I trusted him completely. Richard designed the trust so only you could live in the house. What about Jason? He cannot sell it. What? He cannot mortgage it. What? He cannot transfer ownership. What? Even if he convinced a court to appoint a temporary guardian, your home remained protected. For the first time that night, I felt something besides fear, relief. Richard, even while carrying this terrible burden alone, had never stopped thinking about me. There is something else, Catherine said quietly. I straightened. What? The reason Walter recognized your husband's name. I looked toward Walter. He had stepped outside beneath the awning, giving me privacy. Rain still fell steadily around him. He wasn't simply Richard's friend. No. He was Richard's business partner. I frowned. Business partner? For nearly 12 years. I stared through the rain toward the old motel office. The faded building, the cracked pavement, the flickering sign. Nothing about it suggested hidden wealth. What business? There was another long silence. Then Catherine answered with the sentence that completely changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Deborah. Yes. Your husband secretly owned nearly half of Hayes Motor Lodge. I could only stare into the darkness beyond the window. The motel where my own son had abandoned me. was partly owned by the husband, who had spent years preparing it to become my refuge. For several seconds, I forgot how to breathe. I looked out the rain-speckled window at the weathered motel sign, the peeling paint, the cracked parking lot, the faded flower boxes beneath each room. This place looked as though it struggled to survive from one season to the next. Richard owned half of it. "No," I whispered. "There has to be a mistake." "There isn't," Catherine replied. "My husband would have told me. He wanted to." "Then why didn't he?" "Because he believed telling you too soon would put you in danger." I leaned back in the chair, trying to steady myself. I don't understand how owning a motel could put me in danger. It wasn't the motel. It was what it represented. Walter quietly stepped back inside the office, carrying 2 fresh mugs of coffee. He didn't interrupt. He simply placed one beside me and returned to the front desk. Catherine continued. 12 years ago, Walter's wife was dying of cancer. I glanced toward him. He stood with his back to us, pretending to organize paperwork. The medical bills nearly destroyed him. The bank had already begun foreclosure proceedings against the motel. And Richard helped. Yes. He discovered accounting errors in Walter's loan documents. "Typical Richard," I murmured. He had always believed every number told a story. He negotiated with the bank, reorganized the debt, and invested his own savings. My savings too. Our savings. He considered everything he earned to belong to both of you. Tears filled my eyes again. That sounded exactly like Richard. He refused to become the public owner, Catherine explained. Walter had built the motel with his late wife. Richard believed it should always remain known as Walter's place. So no one knew. Very few. Not even Jason. No. Why? Richard wanted the investment to remain invisible. I looked around the quiet office. So this motel became something much more important than a business. I waited. It became your emergency plan. The words settled heavily inside me. Emergency plan. Richard had actually built an escape route for me, long before I realized I might someday need one. I still don't understand why he thought it would come to this. You haven't heard everything yet. My stomach tightened. There is more. I'm afraid so. Walter approached quietly. Catherine. Yes. I think it's time. He looked at me with deep sympathy. Deborah deserves to know. Know what Catherine spoke gently. I want you to open the desk drawer in front of you. I looked down. There was a small brass handle beneath the counter. My hands trembled as I pulled it open. Inside lay a large brown envelope. Its edges were worn with age. Across the front, written in unmistakable blue ink, were 6 words. For Deborah. Only Deborah. Mart stopped. It was Richard's handwriting. I would have recognized it anywhere. The same careful block letters he used on birthday cards. The same handwriting that had filled grocery lists and anniversary notes for more than 4 decades. I reached toward the envelope but hesitated. I can't. You can? Catherine said softly. I don't know if I should. Richard wanted you to. Walter nodded silently. He told me never to give it to anyone else. I slowly lifted the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. What is inside? Everything Richard believed you might need. My fingers traced the sealed flap. The paper felt old, almost fragile. He prepared this before he died. Nearly 14 months before. 14 months. That meant Richard had already begun preparing long before the heart attack that took him away. How frightened must he have been? How alone? Carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside were several neatly organized folders. Each carried a handwritten label. Letter to Deborah Property, documents, bank records, legal instructions, personal. There was also a small flash drive taped inside. I picked up the letter first. The paper shook in my hands. My darling Deborah, if you are reading this, then the day I prayed would never come has finally arrived. First, I need you to know something before you read another word. You have done nothing wrong. I stopped. A sob escaped before I could continue. Nothing wrong. Those two simple words shattered something inside me. For months, I had questioned every decision, every forgotten appointment, every misplaced key, every repeated conversation. Richard had known exactly what I would blame. He had known I would blame myself. I wiped my eyes and continued reading. If Jason and Melissa have convinced you that you are becoming incapable, please stop believing them. You are grieving. You are growing older. Neither of those things makes you weak, and neither gives anyone the right to take away your choices. I covered my mouth. The room blurred through tears. Walter quietly looked away, giving me privacy. Richard's voice seemed alive inside every sentence. If I am no longer beside you, it means I failed in the one promise I always wanted to keep, to protect you for the rest of my life. So I have done the only thing I could. I prepared people and documents that can continue protecting you after I am gone. I couldn't read for nearly a minute. The tears wouldn't stop. Eventually I continued. I did not tell you everything because I know your heart. You would have forgiven Jason before he admitted what he had done. You would have destroyed every safeguard to keep peace inside the family. That is why I chose silence. Please forgive me. I pressed the letter against my chest. Oh, Richard. Catherine waited patiently before speaking again. There's another document. I nodded weakly. Inside the folder labeled bank records lay copies of statements, highlighted transactions, canceled checks, transfer confirmations. One page immediately caught my attention. It showed the same $12,000 transfer I had questioned weeks earlier. Except there was an attached note. Unauthorized signature below, it was another document, a handwriting analysis. The signature looked almost identical to mine. Almost, but not quite. The expert had circled several tiny differences. This, I whispered, my signature. It wasn't yours, Catherine said. No, it was forged. I felt physically ill. Jason, my own son. He really did this. I'm afraid he did. Another folder contained printed emails. Richard had written detailed notes beside each one. Jason requested duplicate bank statements without Deborah's knowledge. Jason asked about removing Deborah from online account notifications. Jason attempted to change beneficiary information. Every page revealed something new, something darker, something I had never imagined. Then I reached the final folder. Medical concerns. Inside was a business card from my family physician. Behind it sat handwritten notes. Questions Jason had asked. Questions about memory testing, guardianship, cognitive decline, power of attorney. One sentence had been underlined 3 times by Richard. How difficult is it to prove an elderly parent is no longer mentally competent? The room suddenly felt colder. I remembered Jason insisting on attending appointments. I remembered him answering questions before I could, correcting me, explaining things for me. At the time, I thought he was helping. Now I realized he had been studying me, collecting information, building a case. My hands began shaking uncontrollably. I can't. Walter quietly placed a box of tissues beside me. You don't have to read everything tonight. No, I looked down at Richard's careful handwriting. I need to know. I reached for the small flash drive taped inside the envelope. What is this? Catherine answered immediately. That's the one Richard hoped you would never have to hear. What does it contain? A conversation. Between who? She hesitated, then quietly said, between Richard and Jason. I stared at the tiny flash drive resting in my palm. Somewhere inside that little piece of plastic was a conversation my husband had secretly recorded. A conversation that would finally reveal just how long my son had been planning to take everything from me. I turned the small flash drive over in my hand. It looked ordinary. Just a black plastic memory stick, no larger than my thumb. Yet Richard had kept it hidden for more than a year. He had believed it was important enough to leave behind after his death. My fingers hesitated. I don't know if I can listen. You should, Catherine said gently. But not alone. Walter disappeared into the office behind the front desk and returned carrying a slim laptop. I've kept this ready, he said quietly. You knew this moment would come. I hoped it never would. He placed the laptop on the counter, inserted the flash drive, and opened a folder containing several audio files. Each recording had a date. The earliest was almost 18 months old. The most recent was only 3 weeks before Richard died. My heart pounded. There are so many. Richard documented everything once he realized ordinary conversations might not be enough. Walter clicked the first recording. Static crackled through the speakers. Then Richard's voice filled the quiet office. Strong, steady, comfortingly familiar. For one impossible second, it felt as though he had come back to me. If you're listening to this, Deb, Richard said, I'm sorry. I gasped. This recording wasn't meant to be evidence, he continued. It's simply proof that I tried. The recording ended. Only 10 seconds. I wiped fresh tears from my face. He knew I'd hear that, Catherine answered softly. He made it for you after organizing the files. Walter opened another recording. This one is different. The timestamp showed it had been made 14 months earlier. A door opened somewhere in the background. Then Jason's voice became clear. Dad, this can't keep going. Richard answered calmly. What can't? You know exactly what I mean. No, you're sitting on a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars while I'm drowning. Silent. Then Richard spoke. The house belongs to your mother and me. Exactly. And you don't need all of it. My stomach tightened. Richard remained calm. Jason, what? If you need financial help, ask. I am asking. No. I mean, honestly. You think I haven't been honest? I think you've avoided telling me how bad things really are. Jason sighed loudly. My business hit a rough year. I've seen the numbers. It's temporary. I hope so. Another long silence followed. Then Jason said something that made my blood run cold. You could transfer the house now. Richard didn't answer immediately. Transfer it? To me. While we're still alive. It'll save taxes. Richard almost laughed. No, it won't. It could. No. You've got more than enough. Richard's voice hardened slightly. This conversation is over. It doesn't have to be. I said no. The recording stopped. I stared at the laptop. I've never heard him speak to Richard like that. There are more, Catherine said. Walter opened another file. This one sounded different. The voices were louder, more emotional. Jason spoke first. You don't trust me. Richard sighed. I don't trust what desperation can make good people do. I'm your son. I know. I deserve part of what's yours. You deserve honesty. I deserve a chance. I've given you several. Jason's voice rose. You always choose Mom. My heart skipped. What? Richard answered quietly. This isn't about choosing. It always is. You don't understand marriage. I understand that she controls everything. I actually flinched. Richard answered immediately. No. We make decisions together. Jason laughed bitterly. She doesn't even understand half the financial paperwork. Richard's tone became dangerously calm. Be very careful what you say next. Jason ignored the warning. If something happened to you tomorrow, she'd never manage alone. Richard replied without hesitation. Then you help her. I would. No. A long silence followed. You would control her. The office became so quiet I could hear rain striking the windows. Jason spoke again. You really think I'd steal from Mom? I think you're scared. I'm trying to survive. I know. So help me. I already have. Not enough. Another pause. Then Richard asked the question that changed everything. Did you take one of Deborah's checks? The silence that followed seemed endless. Finally, yes. I stopped breathing. Jason continued quietly. I meant to tell you. When? After I paid it back. You forged her signature. I borrowed it. You committed a crime. I borrowed money from my own family. You stole from your mother. I said I'd repay it. Richard spoke more softly than I expected. Jason. What? Look at me. There was movement in the recording. I don't care about the money. You don't. I care about the man you've become. The next few seconds were almost unbearable. Jason's voice cracked. I'm failing. I know. I'm trying. I know. I don't know what else to do. Richard answered with heartbreaking gentleness. You tell the truth. I can't. Then this gets worse. The recording ended. Tears rolled down my face. Richard hadn't screamed. He hadn't threatened. He had still been trying to save our son. Walter quietly handed me another tissue. There are 2 more recordings you need to hear. I nodded weakly. He clicked the next file. The date was only 6 months before Richard died. Jason sounded frustrated. I spoke with someone. Who? A lawyer. Richard's voice sharpened. About what? Guardianship. I closed my eyes. No, Jason continued. I'm just gathering information. For what reason? If Mom starts slipping. She isn't. She might. Richard interrupted him. Your mother is grieving. Exactly. That isn't incompetence. You don't know what will happen. I know your mother. Another silence. Then Jason asked, what if a doctor agreed she couldn't manage finances? Richard answered immediately. I would know whether she could. And if you weren't around. The room seemed to freeze. Richard took several seconds before replying. If I'm not around, you protect her. Jason didn't answer. Richard continued. You don't take control of her. You don't isolate her. You don't convince her she's helpless. You don't make decisions she hasn't asked you to make. Every sentence felt like Richard had somehow seen into the future. Then came the words that shattered me. Jason spoke so quietly, I almost missed them. If she signed everything voluntarily, Richard interrupted. Would she really be volunteering? Another pause. If she believed she had no choice. Silence. If someone convinced her she couldn't trust herself. Silence again. Richard's voice became almost a whisper. That isn't love. It's manipulation. The recording stopped. No one in the office spoke. I couldn't. Everything Melissa had said over the past 8 months echoed inside my mind. You already asked that. Maybe you forgot. Let Jason handle it. You're confused. You shouldn't worry. Little by little. They hadn't tried to take my money first. They had tried to take my confidence. Because once I stopped trusting myself, I would start trusting them instead. Walter quietly closed the laptop. I think that's enough for tonight. I looked toward the rain outside. It's almost morning. He nodded. The courthouse opens in a few hours. I frowned. Court? Catherine's voice returned through the phone. Deborah? Yes. There's one last thing Richard believed you should know before sunrise. What is it? She hesitated, then spoke the words that made every minute suddenly matter. Jason filed an emergency guardianship petition 3 weeks ago. I felt every ounce of color leave my face. He did what? The hearing begins at 9 o'clock this morning. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was already after 3. If you aren't there, Catherine paused. Your son may legally gain the power to make every decision for the rest of your life. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my own heartbeat. 9 o'clock. It was already after 3 in the morning. Only a few hours separated me from a courtroom where my own son intended to convince a judge that I could no longer make decisions for myself. I have to go, I said, pushing back my chair. Walter gently placed a hand on my shoulder. You will. I can't sit here. I know. But we have to do this the right way. I looked back at the phone. Catherine. I'm here. What happens if I'm not in court? She didn't soften the truth. If you fail to appear, Jason's attorney will argue that you've wandered away, that you're refusing medical treatment, and that you're unable to protect yourself. He left me here. I know. But unless we prove it, the court only sees documents. I felt sick. He already has documents. Yes. What kind? An emergency petition. What does it say? Catherine took a slow breath. It states that you've experienced increasing memory loss over the past year. I almost laughed. A year? Yes. It also claims you've forgotten to pay bills. I didn't. It says you've become confused while driving. I haven't. It claims you've misplaced medication several times. My medication was always exactly where I left it. I know. The petition also says you've become vulnerable to financial exploitation. The irony was almost unbearable. I am vulnerable. Yes, but not in the way Jason described. Walter quietly walked into the office behind the front desk. A few moments later, he returned carrying an old leather folder. I think she should see this. What is it? I asked. Richard left instructions for this exact morning. My chest tightened. There are more instructions. Walter opened the folder. Inside was a neatly typed checklist. At the top, Richard had written by hand. If Deborah ever needs these steps, remind her she is stronger than she believes. I covered my mouth. Richard, even in a legal checklist, he had found a way to comfort me. Walter read aloud. Step 1, contact Catherine Brooks. We've done that. Step 2, confirm Deborah has access to emergency medication. Walter smiled gently. Done. Step 3, secure the evidence package. He touched the brown envelope. Done. Step 4, deliver Deborah safely to Franklin County Courthouse. I looked up. He planned every step. Catherine answered quietly. He planned everything he could. I shook my head. I still can't believe he carried this alone. He hoped he was wrong. Walter closed the folder. He prayed he'd never need any of it. Silence settled over the office. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me all night. Why didn't Richard tell me after he found out Jason forged my signature? Neither of them answered immediately. Then Catherine spoke. Because he believed you would forgive Jason before protecting yourself. I lowered my eyes. She wasn't wrong. If Richard had accused Jason while he was still alive, I probably would have insisted there had been some misunderstanding. I would have begged them to reconcile. I would have chosen peace over evidence. Richard had known me better than I knew myself. There's something else, Catherine said. What? Jason didn't file the petition alone. I frowned. What do you mean? Melissa signed a sworn statement. I closed my eyes. What did she say? She claimed you've become increasingly forgetful. She wrote that you've left the stove on several times. I never have. She stated you often repeat conversations. Sometimes. Everyone does. Exactly. But when those ordinary moments are collected together, they look like evidence. Yes. I suddenly remembered every family dinner. Every time Melissa had corrected me. Every sympathetic glance. Every sigh. Every notebook she encouraged me to keep. She hadn't been helping me remember. She had been creating a record, a carefully constructed story, one that made me look less capable every month. I was never the audience, I whispered. What? They weren't trying to convince me. Walter nodded slowly. They were preparing to convince everyone else. The realization made me physically ill. Every conversation had been part of something larger. Every tiny comment, every unnecessary correction, every suggestion that I was becoming confused. It had never been random. It had been deliberate. Catherine interrupted my thoughts. Deborah, yes, there's good news. I almost laughed. There is, yes. What could possibly be good right now? You called me before the hearing. I waited. If you had arrived after 9, she didn't finish the sentence. I understand. You also have something Jason doesn't know exists. I looked at the folders spread across the counter. Richard's evidence. Exactly. Walter added quietly. And one witness. I looked at him. You? He nodded. I've spent 12 years honoring a promise. And now it's time to keep the most important part of it. I felt a lump rise in my throat. You barely know me. Walter smiled sadly. I know the man who loved you. That's enough. His words reminded me so much of Richard that I had to look away. Catherine spoke again. Deborah, I need you to answer one final question. All right. Are you willing to testify against Jason if necessary? The office became very quiet. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease. I stared at Richard's letter, at his handwriting, at the careful planning that had consumed the final years of his life. Then I pictured Jason at 8 years old, running through sprinklers, building birdhouses with Richard, falling asleep on the couch during Christmas movies. How had that little boy become the man who left his own mother at a roadside motel? I don't want to destroy my son. I know. I still love him. I know. I never stopped. I know. Tears rolled down my cheeks. But I struggled to finish the sentence. If I stay silent, Catherine completed it for me. He'll do it again. Not just to me, to someone else. Perhaps one day even to Hannah. I slowly nodded. I'll tell the truth. That's all anyone is asking. Walter looked relieved. Richard hoped you'd say that. I managed a weak smile through my tears. He always had more faith in me than I had in myself. The old clock in the lobby chimed 4 times. 4 o'clock. 5 hours until the hearing. Walter checked his watch. We should leave before sunrise. So early. I don't want Jason finding this place. I looked toward the dark highway. You think he'll come back? Walter's expression hardened for the first time since I'd met him. If Jason realizes you aren't where he expected you to be, he paused. He may stop at nothing to find you before the court does. Those words settled heavily over the room. For the first time all night, I realized this wasn't just a race against time. It was a race against my own son. Walter insisted we leave before dawn. The sky was still a deep shade of blue when he backed his old pickup truck out of the motel parking lot. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the road slick and glistening beneath the streetlights. I sat in the passenger seat, Richard's envelope resting securely in my lap. Every few minutes, I placed my hand on it, as if I were afraid it might disappear. Walter noticed. He planned for you to hold on to that yourself, he said quietly. I don't think I'll ever let it go. I don't blame you. We drove in silence for nearly 20 minutes before Catherine called again. Walter has you? Yes, I answered. Good. I still can't believe this is happening. I know. Tell me honestly. There was a pause. Did Richard ever believe Jason could change? He did. The answer surprised me. He never stopped hoping your son would admit what he'd done. So why prepare all this? Hope isn't the same as trust. I looked out the windshield. The highway was almost empty. He hoped Jason would choose honesty, Catherine continued. But he prepared in case he chose something else. That sounded exactly like Richard. He always kept a spare flashlight, a backup house key, an extra blanket in the trunk. Not because he expected disaster, because he believed preparation was an act of love. The truck rolled quietly through the darkness. After another mile, Walter finally spoke. Richard visited this motel every 3 or 4 months. I turned toward him. He did, usually on a Tuesday. Every few months. Walter smiled faintly. He always brought 2 things. What? Fresh coffee. I smiled through my tears. That sounds like Richard. And homemade cookies. I laughed softly. I baked those. I know. You knew? He always said, Deborah made too many again. The laugh disappeared almost as quickly as it came. So, all those business trips? Most of them were real. But sometimes, he stopped here. I looked down at my hands. I never knew. He wanted it that way. Walter kept his eyes on the road. He never hid you from his life. He hid this place from your worries. We drove another few miles before he continued. The motel wasn't doing well financially. I noticed. Walter chuckled. It looks worse than it is. What do you mean? People judge the paint. They don't see the books. That sounded exactly like something Richard would have appreciated. Walter continued. About 6 years ago, a development company began buying land near the interstate. I didn't know that. Very few people did. They wanted this property. And you refused? So did Richard. Why? Walter smiled. Because this place had become more than a motel. What had it become? A promise. I looked at him. A promise. Richard said if anyone ever needed a safe place to start over, he wanted one room to always be available. I immediately thought of room 7. So that's why. Walter nodded. We've never rented that room permanently. I stared at him. For 12 years. Yes. Even if you lost money. It wasn't a loss. It was keeping my word. My throat tightened again. Richard hadn't simply invested in property. He had quietly built a refuge, not just for me, for anyone who might someday need it. The sunrise slowly began coloring the eastern sky. Orange light spread across the horizon. For the first time since Jason had driven away, I noticed something beautiful. Richard always loved sunrises. He used to say every sunrise was proof that yesterday didn't get the final word. I whispered those words aloud. Walter smiled. He said that here too. I laughed through fresh tears. Of course he did. A few minutes later, Catherine called again. Deborah? Yes. I need to prepare you. For what? Jason won't simply admit what happened. I know. He'll probably tell the judge you're confused. I expected that. He may even cry. I looked down. He used to cry whenever he knew he'd done something wrong. I imagine he still does. But tears aren't evidence. No. They're emotion. She paused. You must answer only the questions asked. I understand. Don't argue. I won't. Don't interrupt Jason. I'll try. And Deborah? Yes. If he apologizes today. I waited. Remember why you're there. I closed my eyes. Not revenge. Truth. Richard hadn't spent years collecting evidence because he wanted to punish our son. He wanted to protect me. There was a difference. An enormous difference. Walter exited the highway. We're almost there. My stomach tightened. Traffic slowly increased as we entered Columbus. People were beginning their normal Tuesday morning. Coffee shops opened. School buses appeared. Office workers hurried through parking lots. To everyone else, it was just another ordinary day. To me, it was the day I might lose or reclaim my entire life. Walter suddenly looked into the rearview mirror. His expression changed. What is it? I asked. I think we've been followed. I twisted around. About 5 car lengths behind us was a dark gray SUV. It looked familiar. Very familiar. Walter changed lanes. The SUV changed lanes too. He slowed slightly. So did the SUV. My heartbeat accelerated. Do you think it's them? I don't know yet. Walter turned onto a side street. The SUV followed again. He frowned. I don't like this. My hands instinctively tightened around Richard's envelope. What do we do? Walter reached for his phone. I'm calling Catherine. Within seconds, she answered. What happened? I think someone's following us. Can you identify the vehicle? Dark gray SUV. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Jason drove. A dark gray SUV. Walter looked into the mirror once more. Then he quietly said the words I had prayed I would never hear. I think your son knows you're coming to court. Walter tightened his grip on the steering wheel, but he didn't panic. Stay calm, he said. We don't know for certain that it's Jason. I looked through the rear window again. The dark gray SUV remained several car lengths behind us. It neither sped up nor fell back. My stomach twisted. That's the same model he drives. I know. Walter picked up his phone and pressed a single button on the dashboard. The call connected through the truck's speakers. Catherine, I'm here. I believe we're being followed. Describe the vehicle. Walter did. There was a brief silence before Catherine answered. Don't drive directly to the courthouse. I stared at the dashboard. What? If Jason realizes Deborah has the evidence, he may try to stop her from arriving. Walter nodded. I was thinking the same thing. Drive to the underground parking garage on Oak Street. The county garage. Yes. Detective Susan Parker is waiting there. I blinked. The detective? She agreed to meet us before court. My heartbeat slowed just enough for me to think clearly again. For the first time since Jason had driven away from the motel, I realized we weren't alone anymore. Richard had planned for this. Walter turned onto another street. The SUV stayed behind us. He made 2 unexpected turns through a quiet neighborhood. The SUV continued following. Walter looked at me. I don't think it's coincidence anymore. Neither did I. 10 minutes later, we entered the underground county parking structure. Walter drove down one level, then another. The concrete walls echoed with the sound of the pickup's engine. The SUV hesitated at the entrance. For one long moment, it remained outside. Then, it turned in. It's still coming, I whispered. Walter parked near a concrete pillar. We stay here. Before I could ask why, another vehicle pulled in from the opposite entrance. An unmarked dark sedan. It stopped beside us. A woman in a navy blazer stepped out. She looked to be in her late 40s, with short brown hair and a calm expression that immediately inspired confidence. She walked directly toward us. Mrs. Wilson. Yes. She extended her hand. I'm Detective Susan Parker. I shook it. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I. She looked toward the entrance just as the gray SUV slowly rolled into the garage. It paused. The driver appeared to look around. Then, without parking, it turned around and drove back toward the exit. Susan watched carefully until it disappeared. I've got the plate. She pulled out a small notebook. Walter looked relieved. You think it was them? We'll know in a few minutes. She turned back to me. Mrs. Wilson, are you all right? I almost laughed. I don't know how to answer that. She smiled gently. Fair enough. Walter handed her Richard's envelope. No, I said quickly. It stays with me. Susan nodded. Good. I wasn't trying to take it. She simply wanted to confirm I understood its importance. Let's sit down for a few minutes. We found a quiet bench near the elevators. Susan opened a slim folder. I've already reviewed the documents Catherine sent electronically. She looked directly at me. I need to ask several questions. All right. Did your son remove your identification before leaving you at the motel? Yes. Did he take your medication? Yes. Did he leave you with transportation? No. Did he tell you he was abandoning you? I thought carefully. No. He said they were getting gasoline. Susan wrote several notes. Did they ever return? No. Were you able to contact anyone immediately? No. Why not? My phone was gone. My medication. My keys. My driver's license. My charger. Everything important. She nodded slowly. Mrs. Wilson. Yes. From an investigative standpoint, that's significant. Why? Because removing someone's means of communication and identification before leaving them isn't consistent with an accident. The words struck me harder than I expected. I had spent the entire night wondering whether Jason might somehow explain everything. Now, an investigator, someone who had no emotional investment in my family, was looking at the facts. And the facts were ugly. Susan closed the folder. There's something else. What? I contacted your bank this morning. My heart skipped. You did? Yes. They confirmed several unusual transactions. How many? More than one. I stared at her. I only knew about the $12,000. There were additional transfers. My mouth went dry. How much? Susan looked down at her paperwork. Over the last 11 months. She paused. Approximately $83,000 moved from accounts connected to you. I felt dizzy. 83. I never authorized that. I believe you. Walter quietly placed a bottle of water in my hand. I hadn't even realized I was shaking. Susan continued carefully. Some of the transfers appear to have electronic authorization. I never approved them. Did Jason ever help you log into online banking? Yes. Did he ever change your passwords? Yes. She nodded again. That matches what we're seeing. I suddenly remembered every occasion Jason had insisted I didn't need to remember my passwords. Every time he told me, I've got it handled. He had. Just not for my benefit. Susan closed the folder. Mrs. Wilson? Yes. I know today is painful. I nodded silently. But I also need you to understand something. What? You are not the person on trial today. I looked at her. Your competency isn't what concerns me. It isn't. No. She leaned forward slightly. What concerns me is whether someone intentionally tried to convince a competent woman that she wasn't competent anymore. Those words stayed with me because that was exactly what had happened. Not all at once. Not dramatically. One comment, one correction, one missing password, one sympathetic smile, until I had begun questioning my own mind. Susan stood. It's almost time. I looked toward the elevators. My knees suddenly felt weak. What if I can't do this? Walter answered before anyone else could. You can. I don't feel strong. You don't have to feel strong. He smiled kindly. You only have to tell the truth. The elevator doors opened. As we stepped inside, Catherine walked toward us from the courthouse entrance. She was exactly as I had imagined. Professional, composed, confident. She crossed the lobby without hesitation and stopped directly in front of me. For the first time since Richard died, someone looked me straight in the eyes. Not with pity, not with doubt, but with complete belief. She smiled warmly. Good morning, Deborah. I nodded. I'm terrified. I know. She reached into her briefcase and removed a thin blue folder. What is that? She looked at me steadily. The document your son never knew Richard signed. My heart began racing again. What document? Catherine handed me the folder. Across the top in bold letters were the words, Irrevocable Living Trust. I stared at the title, then at Richard's signature, then back at Catherine. She smiled faintly. Before Jason asks the judge for control of your home, he's about to discover that your husband made sure it was never his to take. I stared at the blue folder in my hands. The words, Irrevocable Living Trust, blurred as tears filled my eyes again. I remember signing estate papers, I whispered. But I never knew this existed. You weren't meant to worry about it, Catherine said gently as we walked toward the courtroom. Richard wanted you to continue living your life, not spend it fearing what might happen. But why didn't he tell me after he signed it? She looked at me with a mixture of compassion and honesty. Because he knew you. I gave a weak smile. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. She stopped just outside the courtroom doors. If Richard had told you everything 2 years ago, what would you have done? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pictured Jason sitting at our dining room table, apologizing with tears in his eyes. I already knew my answer. I would have forgiven him. Immediately, I nodded. I probably would have torn up every legal document Richard prepared. And Richard knew that. I closed my eyes. He wasn't protecting the money. No, he was protecting me. Exactly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I finally understood the burden Richard had carried alone. He hadn't hidden the truth because he doubted me. He had hidden it because he knew the size of my heart. And sometimes, a generous heart needs protection more than anyone else. Catherine opened the trust. The document transferred your home into an irrevocable trust almost 2 years ago. What exactly does that mean? It means the house is legally owned by the trust, not by you personally. I frowned. So, I don't own my own home. You absolutely do in every way that matters. She smiled reassuringly. You have the exclusive lifetime right to live there. No one can force you to move. No one can mortgage it. No one can sell it. Not even with a guardianship order. Not under the circumstances Richard anticipated. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in days. Jason hadn't just failed to understand my father. He had completely underestimated him. He really thought of everything. As much as anyone possibly could. Walter quietly joined us. He once told me something. What? If I can't be there beside Deborah forever, I want the law standing beside her instead. I looked down at Richard's signature. That sounded exactly like the man I had married. Practical, quiet, steady. Never dramatic, always dependable. A court clerk opened the courtroom doors. The Wilson guardianship hearing will begin in 10 minutes, Catherine nodded. We're ready. As we entered, I immediately saw Jason. He was sitting beside his attorney in a dark gray suit. Melissa sat directly behind him. The moment Jason looked up and saw me, every bit of color drained from his face. His mouth actually fell open. He hadn't expected me to be there. For a brief second, he simply stared. Then he stood so quickly, his chair slid backward. Mom! His voice echoed across the nearly empty courtroom. He hurried toward me. I've been looking everywhere for you. Before he could come closer, Detective Susan Parker stepped between us. You'll remain where you are, Mr. Wilson. Jason looked confused. What? You heard me. I'm just trying to speak with my mother. Susan's expression never changed. You may do so only through counsel. Jason's eyes moved from Susan to Walter, to Catherine, and finally settled on the brown envelope in my hands. His expression changed. Not sadness, not relief. Fear. Real fear. He knew that envelope mattered. Melissa stood more slowly. She tried to smile. Deborah. I didn't answer. We've been so worried. Still nothing. We thought something terrible had happened. I looked directly into her eyes. Something terrible did happen. Her smile disappeared. The courtroom slowly filled. The judge entered a few minutes later. Everyone stood. After the formal introductions, Jason's attorney rose first. Your Honor, this is an emergency guardianship petition concerning Mrs. Deborah Wilson. The judge looked toward me. I see Mrs. Wilson is present today. Yes, Your Honor, Catherine replied. Jason's attorney seemed momentarily unsettled, but quickly recovered. My client is relieved his mother has been found safely. Found, as though I had wandered away, as though I were a lost child. The attorney continued. Mrs. Wilson has experienced progressive memory decline over the past year. He began listing examples. Repeated conversations, forgotten appointments, misplaced belongings, confusion with finances. Melissa nodded solemnly from the gallery. I listened quietly. Each statement contained just enough truth to sound believable. Yes, I had repeated questions. Yes, I had misplaced my keys once. Yes, I had asked Hannah twice what time her college orientation began. Normal moments, ordinary moments, presented together. They sounded frightening. The attorney finished. My client seeks temporary guardianship solely to ensure his mother's safety and financial well-being. The judge turned toward Catherine. Counsel. She stood calmly. Your Honor, before addressing any legal issues, I request permission to submit evidence establishing that Mrs. Wilson is fully competent and that this petition was filed as part of a broader pattern of financial exploitation. The courtroom became silent. Jason shifted uneasily. His attorney frowned. Financial exploitation. Yes. Catherine placed several folders on the evidence table. We have bank records, handwriting analysis, recorded conversations, witness testimony, and documentation prepared by Mrs. Wilson's late husband long before his death. Jason suddenly looked toward me. Our eyes met. For just a moment, I saw the frightened little boy he used to be. Then it disappeared. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered urgently. The attorney stood again. Your Honor, these allegations are entirely unrelated to today's guardianship petition. I disagree, Catherine replied. They are directly relevant to motive. The judge adjusted his glasses. I'll allow preliminary review. Jason swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this, not even close. Catherine handed the judge the first document. The court will note that Mrs. Wilson's residence has been held in an irrevocable living trust since 2 years prior to Mr. Richard Wilson's death. The judge examined the paperwork carefully. Jason frowned. His attorney leaned over to read it. Then both men looked at each other, confused. Catherine continued. Therefore, even if this guardianship petition were granted, Mr. Jason Wilson would have no authority to sell, transfer, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of the residence. Silence. Complete silence. I watched Jason's face. First confusion, then disbelief, then panic. He turned sharply toward his attorney. What is she talking about? He whispered loudly enough for several people nearby to hear. The attorney quickly flipped through the trust documents. His expression changed. He leaned toward Jason and spoke so quietly I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The look on Jason's face told me everything. For months, perhaps years, he had believed the house would become his. Now in front of an entire courtroom, he had just learned that Richard had quietly removed the very thing Jason had been trying to take. And this was only the beginning. Jason looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. He grabbed the blue trust documents from his attorney's hands. There has to be a mistake. His attorney quietly took them back. There isn't. I never saw these. That doesn't change their validity. Jason stared at me. Mom. His voice was suddenly softer than it had been in months. You knew about this. I slowly shook my head. No. You didn't. No. His eyes widened. So Dad never told you either. No. For the first time since walking into the courtroom, I saw genuine surprise on his face. Richard had kept the secret from both of us. The judge looked over the documents for several moments before placing them neatly on the bench. The trust appears to have been properly executed and recorded. He turned toward Jason's attorney. Counsel, were you aware that the residence was no longer individually owned by Mrs. Wilson? The attorney adjusted his glasses. No, Your Honor. When preparing this petition, my client represented that his mother remained the sole owner of the property. The judge looked directly at Jason. Mr. Wilson, is that correct? Jason swallowed. I believed it was. Believed My father never mentioned this trust. The judge nodded without expression. Whether you knew of the trust is a separate issue. He turned back to Catherine. You may proceed. Catherine walked calmly to the evidence table. Your Honor, the emergency petition argues that Mrs. Wilson can no longer manage her financial affairs. Correct. I'd like to begin with the financial records. She handed the judge another folder. These bank statements cover the 11 months following Richard Wilson's death. The judge examined the highlighted pages. Catherine continued. They show more than $83,000 transferred from accounts associated with Mrs. Wilson. Jason shifted uncomfortably. His attorney immediately stood. Objection. These transfers may have been authorized. Perhaps, Catherine replied calmly, which is why I'd like to introduce Exhibit B. She placed another document before the judge. A certified handwriting analysis comparing Mrs. Wilson's authentic signature with signatures appearing on several withdrawal documents. The courtroom became silent. The judge carefully compared the pages. I see the expert's conclusion. Catherine nodded. The questioned signatures were not written by Mrs. Wilson. Jason suddenly stood. I paid everything back. Every head turned toward him. His attorney grabbed his sleeve. Sit down. Jason slowly lowered himself into his chair. The courtroom remained completely quiet. Catherine didn't raise her voice. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Jason looked confused. You've just confirmed that you signed documents you now claim to have repaid. His attorney closed his eyes briefly. I had seen Richard make that same face years ago whenever someone accidentally admitted something during a difficult audit. Jason realized what had happened a second too late. I didn't mean... His attorney whispered sharply, Stop talking. The judge made a short note. Catherine continued without hesitation. Your Honor, we'd also like to submit recordings made by the late Richard Wilson. Jason immediately looked toward me. His expression hardened. He recorded me, Catherine answered before the judge could. Yes. Without telling me, he believed it necessary after discovering evidence of financial misconduct. Jason shook his head. He had no right. Walter quietly muttered under his breath. He had every right to protect his wife. The judge looked toward Catherine. How many recordings? Several. I don't intend to play them all. She selected one flash drive. I believe this excerpt is sufficient. The courtroom audio system crackled softly. Then Richard's familiar voice filled the room. You don't isolate your mother. A pause. You don't convince her she's helpless. Another pause. You don't make decisions she hasn't asked you to make. Jason stared at the speaker. His face slowly lost all expression. Then his own recorded voice answered. If she believed she had no choice, Richard interrupted. That isn't love. It's manipulation. The recording ended. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The judge looked directly at Jason. Is that your voice? Jason hesitated. Yes. And Mr. Wilson's? Yes. The judge nodded slowly. Jason rubbed both hands across his face. It wasn't like that. Catherine remained composed. Then perhaps you'd like to explain the context. Jason looked toward me, not toward the judge, not toward his attorney, toward me. Mom, his voice cracked. I never wanted this. I said nothing. I was desperate. Still nothing. My business. He stopped. I was drowning. The courtroom waited. I thought, he looked down. I thought everything would work out if I could just hold things together. Catherine asked quietly. By taking control of your mother's finances. Jason didn't answer. By convincing others she wasn't mentally competent, still nothing. By leaving her alone at a roadside motel without identification medication or transportation. Jason suddenly looked up. "I was coming back." The words echoed through the courtroom. Susan Parker finally spoke for the first time. "After how long?" Jason turned toward her. 1 hour." No answer. 3 hours. Silence. The next morning, Jason lowered his eyes. Melissa suddenly stood. "Your Honor, this isn't fair." Every head turned toward her. "My husband isn't a criminal." Susan looked at her evenly. "Mrs. Wilson, did you remove Deborah Wilson's identification before leaving the motel?" Melissa hesitated. "I packed her things." "Did you take the medication?" "I was keeping it safe." "Did you tell Deborah she could carry it herself?" Melissa remained silent. Susan continued. "Did you tell her you were going to buy gasoline?" "Yes." "Were you planning to return immediately?" Melissa looked at Jason. He avoided her eyes. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Melissa answered quietly. "No." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Jason looked at her in disbelief. "What are you doing?" She ignored him. Susan asked one final question. "When you drove away, where did you go?" Melissa closed her eyes. "To Deborah's house." I felt every muscle in my body go rigid. Susan continued. "Why, we—" Melissa's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Wanted to start packing." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even Jason seemed unable to believe she had admitted it. Susan looked toward the judge. "No further questions." The judge slowly removed his glasses. He looked first at me, then at Jason, then at Melissa. Finally, he spoke. "I believe this hearing has become something very different from the emergency guardianship petition originally filed." He paused. "I'm denying the petition effective immediately." Relief flooded through me so suddenly that I almost cried. But before I could fully process his words, the judge continued. "And I am referring this matter for immediate investigation into allegations of financial exploitation, document fraud, and elder abandonment." Jason closed his eyes. Melissa sat down without another word. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel happy. I only felt exhausted. Because the little boy I had once carried into kindergarten had just lost far more than a legal case. I had lost the trust his father spent a lifetime trying to build. No one spoke as the judge's words settled over the courtroom. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Jason remained seated, staring at the table in front of him. Melissa looked toward the floor, her shoulders rigid, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The judge addressed both attorneys. "This court's responsibility today was to determine whether Mrs. Deborah Wilson required an emergency guardian." He paused. "Based on the evidence presented, I find no basis whatsoever to conclude that Mrs. Wilson lacks the capacity to manage her personal or financial affairs." He looked directly at me. "Mrs. Wilson, you answered every question clearly and consistently. You demonstrated a full understanding of your finances, your property, your medical care, and these proceedings." For the first time in months, someone in authority had said out loud what I desperately needed to hear. I wasn't confused. I wasn't incapable. I wasn't losing my mind. The problem had never been my memory. It had been the people trying to convince me not to trust it. The judge continued. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied." He struck the gavel once. The sound echoed through the courtroom. Jason lowered his head. His attorney leaned toward him and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then the judge turned toward Detective Susan Parker. Detective, I understand your department has already begun reviewing the financial documents. Yes, Your Honor. Please proceed according to your investigation. Susan nodded. We will. The hearing officially ended, but no one rushed toward the exits. Everyone seemed to understand that this was only the beginning. Susan approached Jason first. Mr. Wilson? He slowly looked up. I need to ask you not to leave Franklin County until we've completed several interviews. Jason nodded weakly. I understand. She then turned to Melissa. The same applies to you. Melissa's confident posture, the one she had carried for nearly a year, had disappeared completely. Instead of arguing, she simply whispered, Okay. Walter stood quietly beside me. You all right? I looked around the courtroom. I don't know. I thought I'd feel different. You expected relief, I suppose. And I just feel tired. He smiled gently. Sometimes that's what relief feels like. A few minutes later, Catherine joined us with several signed documents. The court clerk has already processed today's ruling. She handed me copies. The guardianship petition is officially dismissed. I held the papers carefully. Richard had spent years preparing for this single morning, and because of him, I still had the right to decide where I lived, who handled my money, how I would spend the rest of my life. Jason slowly walked toward us. Susan watched him carefully but didn't stop him. He stopped several feet away, not close enough to touch me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. The words sounded sincere, but sincerity couldn't erase what had happened. I studied my son's face. He looked older than 43. His eyes were bloodshot. His suit was wrinkled. He seemed like a man who hadn't slept in days. I know that doesn't fix anything, he continued. No, it doesn't. I never wanted to hurt you, I answered quietly. Then why did you? His shoulders slumped. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I waited. I thought if I could save my business. He stopped. I'd put everything back. The money. Yes. The house. Yes. My trust. He couldn't answer. I didn't think it would go this far. I looked at him steadily. It went exactly as far as the choices you made. He closed his eyes. I know. I believed you every single time you told me not to worry. Fresh tears appeared. I know. I defended you. I know. I apologized to you for questioning missing money. I know. Each answer became quieter, smaller. I even wondered if I was developing dementia. Jason covered his face with both hands. I'm sorry. You let me believe I was losing my own mind. Those words broke whatever strength he still had. He began crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a little boy who finally understood the damage he'd done. Part of me wanted to walk over and hug him. That instinct had defined my entire life as a mother. Whenever Jason fell off his bicycle, whenever he failed an exam, whenever his first girlfriend broke his heart, I had always rushed toward him, not away. But another voice spoke inside me, Richard's voice. Protect yourself. For the first time in my life, I listened. I remained exactly where I was. I love you, I said softly. Jason looked up hopefully. But loving you doesn't mean pretending none of this happened. His expression fell. I understand. No, I shook my head. I don't think you do. You left me with no phone. He nodded. You took my medication. Another nod. You took my identification. His shoulders trembled. And you drove away. He began crying again. I thought I'd come back before anyone noticed. I stared at him. You still don't understand. He looked confused. It isn't how long you left me. I placed one hand over my heart. It's that you were willing to leave me at all. Jason couldn't answer. There was nothing left to say. After a few moments, he quietly turned and walked away. I watched my son leave the courtroom. Not in handcuffs, not surrounded by deputies. Just alone. Melissa followed several steps behind him. She never looked back. The courtroom slowly emptied. Only Catherine, Walter, Susan, and I remained. Susan closed her notebook. I'll be in touch over the next few weeks. What happens now? I asked. We continue the investigation. Will Jen go to prison? She answered honestly. I don't know. There are many factors. His cooperation, the financial records, the forensic examination, the district attorney's decisions. I nodded. I don't want revenge. Susan smiled kindly. I didn't think you did. I only wanted my life back. You've taken the first step toward getting it. Walter picked up Richard's envelope and handed it to me. It belongs with you now. I held it close against my chest, the same way I had held Richard's letters throughout our marriage. As we walked out of the courthouse together, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds. Its light spread across the courthouse steps, warm and steady. I stopped for just a moment and looked up at the clear blue sky. Richard used to tell me that storms never asked permission before arriving, but they also never lasted forever. For the first time since the morning he died, I believed him. 3 months passed before I unlocked my front door again. Not because anyone stopped me from coming home, because I wasn't ready. After everything that had happened, the house no longer felt like the same place Richard and I had built together. Every room held two kinds of memories, the beautiful ones and the painful ones. The dining room reminded me of birthday dinners and Thanksgiving laughter. But it also reminded me of the afternoon Jason convinced me to add his name to my bank account. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon whenever I baked, but it was also where Richard had quietly hidden his worries behind a gentle smile. Even the front porch swing seemed different. For years, Richard and I had watched sunsets there together. Now I sat there alone, wondering how someone could spend a lifetime loving a family and still need to prepare for the possibility of being betrayed by it. Fortunately, I wasn't alone for long. Walter visited every Wednesday. He never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes he brought fresh peaches from a roadside farm. Sometimes homemade chili. Sometimes nothing more than coffee and conversation. He never tried to replace Richard. No one could. He simply reminded me that good people still existed. Catherine also stayed in touch. She helped untangle months of financial paperwork, worked with the bank to restore control of my accounts, and guided me through every legal document Richard had left behind. One afternoon, she handed me a folder with a warm smile. Everything has been finalized. I opened it carefully. Every account had been restored to my name alone. The unauthorized access had been removed. New passwords, new security procedures, new beneficiary forms. For the first time in nearly a year, I knew exactly how much money I had. Not because someone told me, because I could see it myself. It felt wonderful. Detective Susan Parker called a week later. The financial investigation is complete. I held my breath. And Jason cooperated. That surprised me. He admitted forging signatures. Yes. He admitted unauthorized transfers. He admitted helping prepare the guardianship petition. I closed my eyes. What happens now? The district attorney agreed to a negotiated resolution. Susan explained that Jason had no previous criminal record and had fully cooperated after the hearing. He was required to repay every remaining dollar. His professional contractor's license would be suspended for a period of time. Hy would perform community service with an organization that supported elderly victims of financial exploitation. He would also complete financial ethics counseling and family mediation if I ever chose to participate. There was one more condition. He may not manage your finances in any capacity. I smiled sadly. I don't think that will be a problem anymore. No, Susan replied gently. I don't believe it will. Several weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. The envelope immediately caught my attention. Not because of the handwriting, because of the return address. Jason. I carried it to the porch before opening it. Inside were 6 pages. No excuses, no explanations, only honesty. He wrote about the pressure of keeping his business alive after several failed investments. He admitted that every dishonest decision became easier after the previous one. He confessed that convincing himself he was borrowing money had helped him ignore the truth. Then came the sentence that made me stop reading for several minutes. I didn't realize I had started seeing you as a problem instead of my mother. I cried harder than I had during the trial. Not because I hated him, because I believed him. That was the tragedy. Greed hadn't appeared overnight. It had slowly replaced gratitude. Fear had slowly replaced love. Excuses had slowly replaced integrity. By the final page, he wrote, "If you never forgive me, I'll understand. If you never trust me again, I'll deserve it. But I promise, I will spend the rest of my life becoming the son Dad believed I could still be." I folded the letter carefully. Then I placed it inside Richard's envelope. It belonged there. A few days before Christmas, Hannah knocked on my front door. She stood there, holding 2 grocery bags and wearing the nervous smile I'd seen since she was little. "Grandma, come here." She hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I didn't know." "I know. I should have noticed. You were never supposed to carry that burden." She looked around the living room. "It feels like Grandpa is still here." I smiled. "He is." Together, we decorated the Christmas tree Richard had planted in our family traditions decades earlier. We laughed while untangling lights, burned the first batch of sugar cookies, argued over whether the angel belonged slightly left or slightly right on top of the tree. For the first time since Richard died, the house sounded alive again. On Christmas morning, before opening presents, I carried one small wrapped package to the porch. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. Inside was a new leather journal. On the first page, I wrote, "I am Deborah Wilson. I am capable. I am stronger than fear. I will never again allow someone else to define my worth." Months later, I drove back to Hayes Motor Lodge, not because I needed a refuge, because I wanted to thank the man who had honored a promise for 12 long years. Walter was repairing one of the flower boxes when I arrived. He smiled the moment he saw me. "I had a feeling you'd come back." "I owed you a proper thank you." "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you more than you'll ever know." We walked slowly across the quiet parking lot together. The motel looked brighter now. Fresh paint covered the office walls. New flowers bloomed beneath every window. Hope had a way of changing how places looked. Before I left, Walter handed me a small wooden box. "Richard wanted you to have this when everything was finally over." I opened it carefully. Inside rested Richard's old pocket watch. the one he carried every day for almost 30 years. Folded beneath it was one final note. My favorite chapter. If you've reached this moment, then you did exactly what I always believed you could do. You stood back up. Don't spend the rest of your life looking behind you. Spend it living. Love again. Laugh again. Trust wisely, but don't stop trusting completely. And whenever you watch the sunrise, remember, I kept my promise. Now it's time for you to keep yours. Live. Always yours, Richard. I held the note against my heart as the morning sun rose over the quiet highway. For the first time in a very long time, the future no longer frightened me. It welcomed me. Life. Lesson. Life has taught me that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people we love most. That truth is painful, but it doesn't mean we should stop loving. It means we should learn that love and wisdom must walk together. Growing older does not make us less valuable. Forgetting a name, asking a question twice, or grieving deeply after losing someone you love does not mean you've lost your dignity or your ability to make your own choices. Never let anyone convince you that your voice matters less simply because your hair has turned gray. Richard showed me that real love isn't only expressed through words. Sometimes it's expressed through quiet preparation, difficult decisions and sacrifices no one else ever sees. He protected me even after he knew he might not live long enough to stand beside me. That was one of the greatest acts of love I have ever known. As for Jason, I still pray for him. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I chose to let go of hatred because hatred would only imprison my own heart. But rebuilding trust is a journey he must choose every single day. Some broken things can be repaired. Others become reminders of lessons we should never forget. If my story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted, or have you seen a family overcome something that seemed impossible? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read as many as I can because your stories matter too. And if you enjoy heartfelt family dramas filled with emotion, hope, and meaningful life lessons, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Wherever you're watching from, thank you for spending your time with me. I hope peace, strength, and brighter days